Now, one of the reasons I've requested this debate today is because I've got many constituents who have been unfortunate enough to suffer from sepsis. And I have a very brave young lady in the hall today, who is Abby. She's sat at the back. And I'm incredibly proud of the strength and determination she's shown to overcome this illness. She's a survivor. But I'm going to tell Abby's story because in November the 28th, 2022, she'd been to a doctor's for some antibiotics for tonsils because she's a long sufferer of tonsillitis. She thought it was tonsillitis again. She's suffered with that all her life. That's understandable. At 6 p.m. on that day, she was blue-lighted to King's Mill Hospital in Ashfield to the accident and emergency because she was fighting for her breath and literally dying in front of her husband, Steve, who sat there. When she got to the hospital, she was given numerous injections of adrenaline. Whilst travelling to the hospital, they thought she was having an anaphylactic fit, which was a reaction to the antibiotics that she'd had that morning. When she arrived at the A&E, she was put on 10 litres of oxygen, but it was evident that this was not enough. It wasn't doing the job. But they didn't, unfortunately, administer any antibiotics or put her on IVs at that time. No blood tests were taken, and her husband, Steve, was constantly asking the staff, is there something else we can do for Abby? Only now, looking back a few years later, was it clear that sepsis was never thought of at the time. Abby very quickly deteriorated, so she was transferred to the ICU at Kingsman Hospital, where she was placed into an induced coma. She was fighting for her life, and all her organs began to shut down at a very rapid rate. Only when the ICU did some tests when the tests started to take place did staff realise how ill she was and that she'd actually got pneumonia, strep B and sepsis. However, this was just the start of her journey. When the ICU team realised that it was far more complicated than they could deal with at King's Mill, so they contacted Glenfield General Hospital in Leicester, and she was transferred to be placed on an ECMO. That's a machine that takes the place of the heart and the lungs. I suppose it's a life support machine. She was very lucky to have fitted the criteria to go on that machine, and she stayed there on that machine for the next 3 weeks, fighting to stay alive in a coma. And without that machine, she would not be here today. There are only 5 of these machines in the UK, and it costs, I think it costs the NHS £20,000 per day per patient. During the process of being on the ECMO machine, it was visible to Abby's family that she was going to lose both hands and both legs beneath the knee, because sepsis had taken over her body, giving her gangrene. On December the 17th, she was transferred back to Kingsmill Hospital, ICU, because she was no longer had to be on the ECMO machine at Leicester, but she still needed round-the-clock intensive care treatment. On February the 9th, she was transferred to Nottingham City Hospital to the burns and plastic ward, where she would wait for her amputations. Imagine that, having to wait in hospital knowing they're going to take your arms and your legs away after everything she's been through. On May the 4th, she was discharged, having spent 6 months in hospital and coming out as a quadruple amputee. And unfortunately, she told me just before we came in, she sometimes forget that she also lost the sight in her left eye. It's incredibly sad. Incredible brave lady. That's Abby's story. And I want to thank you for sharing that with me.